Welcome to This Week in Local, a Locology podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Locology analysts Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin, joined by Mike Boland. Mike, how are you today?
Hey, Charlie. Doing well.
Great. So what are you thinking about?
So this week, we return to a sort of perennial and foundational topic in the Locology verse, which, of course, is search. And, you know, search, it's interesting. It's going through lots of changes, as always, with the kind of shifting algorithm. And, you know, search, you know, backing up, of course, it's become synonymous in our culture with Google. It's like Ziploc and Kleenex. And, you know, I think it's even gone deeper as sort of a cultural entity because it's a verb. But I think we're starting to see some erosion, not necessarily large scale, but some sort of erosion at the margins of Google's dominance. In that, like, it's not the only place search is happening. And I'm not even talking about search engine competitors that have sort of gained some market share over the last year, like Bing and others. But what I'm talking about is in-app search. This continues to grow. So what we're talking about here is like when a standalone app or well-traveled website monetizes its own internal search activity, otherwise known as site search. And though that occurs on a smaller scale than Google's gazillion daily search query volume, you know, it can be more targeted to certain verticals. It can drive, you know, smaller but still meaningful revenue for like smaller players. You know, that's everyone from Yelp to Amazon. Amazon's probably the best example. Their sort of search ad business has actually grown and is now greater than the revenues they get from Prime subscriptions. And that's just the searches people do on Amazon. And then the, you know, sponsored results that come up based on that. So that's been something, everything I just mentioned has been something that we've been watching for a while. And that trend has furthered recently with the latest company to launch this sort of quasi-site search sort of opportunity, which is TikTok. So it's beginning to experiment with sponsored results where its users search for content within its app. And it calls this new program Search Ads Toggle. I'm not sure that name makes a whole lot of sense. But anyway, it offers paid search to brand marketers to get in front of TikTok users for the first time in this sort of sponsored results sort of way. So as you can imagine, from a user perspective, the way that looks is, you know, when users search, there will be sponsored slots in the search results that they get. From the advertiser's perspective, it's modeled after a lot of search ad campaign platforms like AdWords, where, you know, you bid on keywords, you can do things like exclude negative keywords and other sort of brand safety measures. And it's really in early stages, but so far, a few just quick numbers. TikTok has done some testing with early partners like Clinique and Dibs Beauty. Clinique got 441% boost in conversion rates compared to benchmarks, non-search benchmarks, 51% greater click-through rates, 7.4% lift in ad recall, and then 22% decrease in cost per action. So, you know, their cost per conversion relative to some benchmarks. So it's starting to show that it's a fitting environment for that high intent sort of search marketing business model to start to thrive within. And in closing, I'll just saying, you know, we still have to watch this to see where it goes. But one sort of elephant in the room coming full circle is the degree to which this could eat into Google's search market share. And Google has even sort of admitted, Charlie, you wrote last year about their sort of, when they said the quiet part out loud, about many of its users no longer going to Google as the front door to the internet or the front door to their connected experiences, but going to places like TikTok and questioning if that's going to cause any attrition to their business, because it's all about search query volume as the tip of the spear for all the things that come after that in Google's sort of search business model. So that question is still yet to be determined, but that's what we're going to be watching for. If any of these moves from any of these players, not just TikTok, erode Google's dominant search market share.
That's really interesting, Mike. The first couple thoughts that pop into my head when you start mentioning brands, it's like, I'm thinking about demographics and brands and sort of who will migrate to this opportunity. Because I'm thinking it's, younger people.
Yeah.
And so what, is this going to be is this going to be a niche? I hate to say that because that makes it sound small, but will this kind of have a profile that sort of is what you think it will be given the demographics we all know about TikTok?
Yeah, well, relative to quote unquote all the world's information, which is Google's thing, anything is niche. So absolutely, and in this case, it's more targeted.
It can be awfully big. Yeah.
And in this case, it's more targeted, and I think targeted on two levels. One is the sort of the content and the verticals. Two is, as you pointed out, the demographics. So I think that it's sort of like I liken TikTok's sort of advertisers that flock to it almost like Snap's sort of target market for brands. So I mean, it's like it's fashion, it's food, it's things like this. So I think that all search marketing is contextually relevant. So it's contextual to the search term, and you have to imagine that on TikTok, that search sort of terminology, that corpus of keywords, isn't going to be as broad as, again, all the world's information. It's going to be more about looking for fun prank videos or dance videos or whatever. So you have to think of the types of advertisers that want to be in that environment, whether it's contextually relative to the keyword or the content. Again, I think we're going to see a lot of fashion, food, those types of things. And then that second level with the actual demographics, very attractive in terms of sort of increasingly buying empowered Gen Z. And TikTok's whole sort of world. So I think on those two levels, there's a lot of strength here that TikTok can sort of lean into.
So I think it makes sense to frame this as, how worried should Google be? But again, the next round of thoughts that pop into my head is, should Instagram and Snap be worried more? Yeah. Is this more of a threat to them?
Possibly. They haven't done a lot when it comes to search advertising. They've done some.
Dollars off the table,
Yeah. Well, it could be, in terms of share of wallet. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So those brands, instead of pouring money into, Instagram, whether it be like paying social influencers or the display ad inventory they have. Yeah, I mean, those same sort of the dollars that are in the social bucket could come out of those places and into what TikTok is doing. I guess
that was my thought is like, is this the money that's going to what you just said, influencers and social spend, can some of that start going into these more structured ad formats like what?
Yeah, and then the question is, will the budget come from brands' search budget or will it come from their social budget? This is sort of a Venn diagram. Yeah. This what we're talking about here is sort of a Venn diagram between them. I think it could go either way. But I think sort of in defense of Google, I was really down on Google. I think that like TikTok has a lot of inherent advantages in walking into this, the user intent, all the targeting opportunities we just talked about, but it's not going to be a no-brainer. I mean, though it has those sort of inherent advantages on which to build something, it still has to build it. I mean, to execute a search marketing program to the degree that Google has perfected over the last like 25 years, TikTok has to sort of learn that playbook. It's actually doing something similar in e-commerce where it's trying to build up its own sort of native e-commerce stores. And that's a learning curve. It's not a no-brainer. It's not a slam dunk that it's going to kill Amazon by doing that. And I think the same goes here with, just sort of wandering into search and suddenly, killing it. So we're going to have to,
you can't just wander in and kill Facebook overnight because they've spent so many years building up that ad engine with all the data, all the targeting. You can't just replicate that overnight, And so I this will be not a death of a few cuts if there's a death at all. It's going to be at least 1,000, probably more. Okay, so we can pivot now, and I've got a pretty different topic that kind of jumped out at me as I was looking around for things to think about, write about, etc. And it's about down rounds. Now, we don't talk about venture a lot here. It's not a venture podcast, but we do talk about companies raising money sometimes. And, it's no big secret that we're at least a year, probably 15 months-ish into sort of the VC winter, whatever phrase you want to put on it. And one of the things that we talked about in a podcast, I forget when exactly, but a while ago, maybe, a third of the way into doing this thing, we had a conversation about why we thought the term unicorn was so damn stupid. And I still think that. And kind of, this whole sort of VC winter and what that was doing to how businesses were being run and what that would do to fundraising. And that one of the things you said, I recall, is that, yeah, we'll see probably some startups fail. And I think that's happening, will continue to happen. But we're going to see a lot of down rounds. And that was a point you made, as I recall. And I'm not trying to overcredit you with a prediction here, but it's certainly coming true. And it's been true for a while, but there was a pretty big one that I read about this week. And it was a company called Ramp. It's a fintech, founded only in 2019. So it's a pretty new company. I guess that's still considered new, only 4 years old. And it just raised $300 million on a $5.8 billion valuation. That doesn't sound so bad under normal circumstances, but that's 28% lower valuation than its last fundraise. Okay. Now that's not as crazy as last year when we wrote about Klarna, the big fintech out of Sweden, the buy now, pay later company, that had an 80% down round or an 80% haircut in its valuation. So I think what we're maybe seeing, I don't know if these are rightly seen as bumpers on a spectrum of down rounds or anything like that, but I think we're probably seeing a capitulation, perhaps. That might be a little strong, but some sort of normalization of the idea of down rounds right now. And I don't know if I'm not enough of an expert on venture trends, et cetera, to say maybe that's a signal that we're getting to an endpoint on sort of the bloodletting with this. Maybe not. I don't know. I think everyone I read, all the sort of financial people I follow on all the socials are basically saying, right off to 2023, but we're probably going to look at something different in 2024. Maybe this is a signal of the beginning of the end. I don't know. I mean, that's a pretty massive round. And one of the interesting things is that Ramp said that they're going to take that 300 million and they're going to put it into product. Okay, they usually say something like that. And they're also going to put it into hiring, which is, again, during the up round phase, it was always about hiring people, right? Now, they say, well, we're putting bodies back into the building or wherever they are. Yeah. And so it jumped out at me. I thought, okay, this is interesting. And the last interview I did with Matt Marks from eVocalize, we didn't talk about this specific company, but we talked about fundraising. eVocalize kind of raised a much, $12 million, smaller company, beginning of last year, which was really kind of the beginning of the end, or kind of the end of the golden era, And he said, pretty much right after they raised, VCs kind of closed their wallets, and he said, he's been through the full experience of going from you just got to grow, and then what are you doing? And just keep growing, and if you got to raise more money, just go raise more money. To you got to start making some money, brother. And yeah. And I think this is just kind of a cherry on that sundae, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the down rounds, I think they cut in two major ways. One is the sort of symbolism, like they've traditionally been viewed as a sign of sort of a toxic business, and then it's really hard to just continue raising or IPO or whatever your exit's going to be. I think that factor has been alleviated to some degree by the understanding that it's sort of happening to everyone, as valuations in general, especially in software, have just been sort of recalculated across the board in the sort of backlash to the previous COVID boom in valuation. So that part is less worrisome. But then there's the sort of practical part where, there's actually a sort of a financial detriment, especially the investors in your most previous round who essentially have their equity, not their equity shares, but their equity value essentially repriced at this new, whatever the valuation that is any funding event is a valuation event or a valuation validation. At any point, you're basically going on your
whether
last
it's publicly
funding round.
Released or not, there's always a valuation assigned to every round.
Yeah. So anyway, your most recent investors sort of get screwed. I think that's the place where it hurts on deeper levels. Now, the sort of takeaway in terms of like, so what do you do to avoid this? I've always thought like, well, why don't people just everyone's always going for more money in every round. Why don't you go for less money and avoid this? And I think that's a little myopic.
In this case, they did. It was 300. Yeah. I mean, still large amounts of money, granted.
No, but I mean, previously,
750 million in the previous.
No, but I'm saying the previous one. Instead of just like always negotiating for more, you negotiated for the exact amount you needed. Like on the previous round, why didn't they try to get 300? Now, I think that's going back on my own statement. That's myopic though, because though it prevents future down rounds, or at least mitigates the possibility of future down rounds to take less money at any given time, you also have less of a runway. And
it's always about maximizing your runway. I mean, it shouldn't just be about that, but
there's no silver bullet answer to any of this. But I think a lot of companies may be asking themselves why they didn't take less. There's actually a really funny episode of Silicon Valley where someone asked this guy of like, why didn't you just take less money? And he was like, I didn't know I could have taken less money. That would have solved everything. Because there was a down round that ended up.
No one mentioned it.
Yeah, there was a down round that ended up sending this company into this death spiral. And he was like, I didn't know I could take less money on the previous round, of course. Right. But anyway, that's not the answer. But I've always thought like, is that calculus ever within the sort of consideration in these sort of courtship processes for, new VC rounds? It seems like startups are always just driving towards as much as they can possibly get, while the sun's shining, just get as much as you can get. And I think that continues to be the methodology. But in certain cases, I always wonder why folks don't, try to take less. Sense. Yeah. At the same valuation, of course, you give away less equity, but you're also taking less cash.
Right. And so you might have to raise again sooner if you're not managing that burn well,
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of factors.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that had always been kind of a constraint on down rounds was also employee equity,
Yeah.
That seems to be less of a factor these days. I think people are going into startups with lower expectations of getting rich because they went to work for a startup.
Also it's less of a seller's market. It's less of a seller's market for talent, given that, employees are laying people off. So folks have less leverage when they're going to negotiate for their, whatever package that they're getting hired under.
Right.
So I think that there's probably less equity being thrown around because companies simply have more of the leverage on their end of the bargaining table now and are probably giving away less.
Yeah, but what I'm wondering, and again, going back to this conversation I just had with Matt Marks, again, the sort of pivot, which it's been talked about endlessly, from, raise money to and grow to, start making some money, start cutting, et cetera, et cetera. I am wondering if those standards will change during the next VC boom, whenever it comes, or will it be back to the same old binary of when money's flowing, it's just grow. When money's tight,
I think it's the latter because
the same again. Yeah,
it's the latter because it's cyclically we see that. Going back years and years and years. I don't know why this cycle it would change. That less of a sort of return to business fundamentals, less of a reinvest in order to just grow. It's more about showing some more meat on your P&L.
You hear people say, "Oh, you can always just go raise more money." Then the bubble. There's a bubble.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I guess the dynamics, we'll see, but you're probably right. The dynamics will probably be exactly the same next time. Memories, when you experience physical pain, as soon as the pain goes away, your memory of that pain tends to go away as well. So I think it's kind of how these things work. You forget how bad it was, and then you just go back to how good it could be, So we'll see, but I think you're probably right about that one. So, Mike, why don't you talk about who you think won the week?
Yeah, so my who won the week is going to be the collective world of streaming. And there's been a sort of a symbolic milestone in the world of television and streaming entertainment recently where linear TV, which is basically cable and broadcast, has dipped below 50% of US viewers for the first time, according to Nielsen. So that's a big sort of symbolic milestone. At the same time, streaming correspondingly has gone up to 38.7% of US TV viewers. It's a record high for the category, up 25% year over year, driven by some of the market share leaders there, which are YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, the usual suspects there. And it's something that has been a long time coming. I, personally speaking, I cut the cord in 2008, haven't looked back. It seems like now a lot of other people have joined me in that.
I have as well. I can't remember when, but I have as well, yeah.
Yeah.
Been a while.
And, so I did it for cost, and a lot of people have done it for cost. That cost consideration has now sort of shifted where some of the math around the average price for that sort of bundle that you cobble together, whether it be YouTube TV and Netflix and Hulu and Max and Peacock and whatever, the average size of that bundle is around $80 right now in the US, which is not that much less than the traditional cable bundle. So what that tells me is it's not just about saving money, it's the actual product quality itself, because it's the sort of on-demand culture that we live in, where you just want the things that you want, no more appointment viewing. Also, just like the product itself. I mean, I don't want to go too much of into an axe grinding thing here, but when you look at the elegant interface of my Apple TV compared to that maddening UX of like the Motorola cable box that the cable company gives you, and it's like 6 years old, and that sort of quasi-monopoly position they had for so long, just they got lazy. They stopped innovating, and the product itself is just, I'm going to be perfectly blunt here, terrible compared with some of the really elegant software that you can get in a Roku box or an Apple TV, and these apps, the individual apps themselves. They're really artfully designed as opposed to that old school, ugly and maddening, cable menu system in the grid and all that type of stuff. So anyway, that's because of all that. I think besides
the guide page or whatever.
The guide, yeah. So besides who won the week, there's a hidden lesson here too, in just like the strength of the product itself, the strength of product development, product quality, and I think that's what got the sort of collective world of streaming to this milestone.
If you aren't good, if you're not delivering a good product, it might take a while, but sooner or later somebody's going to catch you, right?
Yeah, that's like. It's like Moore's Law. That's Charlie's Law.
Sooner or later, it's going to get you.
Yeah.
I've got a very quick and very different who won the week. So nothing could be less local than the South Pole of the moon, unless you live on the South Pole of the moon, of course. I just want to give it up to India, the nation of India, for landing a craft. I forgot the name of it. I read it this morning. On the south, it's an unmanned craft on the South Pole of the moon. I believe they're the fourth nation to land a craft of some sort on the surface of the moon, which I actually didn't know. Until I read that this morning. Quite an accomplishment. I don't have all the details, but I just think, and I think it kind of underscores something we're seeing happen in the world, where some countries are rising, and India is one of them. And it's a country to watch geopolitically, economically, et cetera, Putting in a craft on the moon, I think, really plants a flag of sorts, certainly on the moon, but just sort of figuratively as a nation that matters.
Legitimacy, yeah.
So congrats to the engineers and everyone else who worked on that for India. That's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah.
Mike, you want to read us out?
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at locology.com. So please subscribe, like, and comment. Your engagement helps others find us. So I'm Mike Boland with Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. So thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Locology's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.